Hi everyone, Terry Burns back here with part two of my assignment, Mastery Learning and Cognitive Development. Just to refresh our memories, I've been looking at a book, Every Child Can Succeed by William Glasser, MD. And in order to lay the stages for the next stages of my presentation, I wanted to review Vygotsky's theory. And we're going to look at Mastery Learning and Cognitive Development in part two. And just to review Vygotsky, his cognitive development proceeds based on three things. Firstly, culture. Secondly, language. Thirdly, social interaction. And it was so marvelously illustrated by the young man named Limok and his father, and how important parts of their culture and his personal development were transmitted to him through language, the term Iblik, and I very much enjoyed that illustration. In order for cognitive development to proceed as a theory, Vygotsky introduces three concepts, and the first one is the zone of proximal development. This zone describes a range of difficulty of tasks that are too hard for learners to complete alone, put very simply. And the need is there to have somebody who is more knowledgeable than the person who is engaged in the learning. Now, here's some fundamental things about the zone of proximal development. Firstly, if a task is easy enough for the learner to complete it alone, then no cognitive development will occur. Now, secondly, if a task is too hard for a learner to complete successfully, even with assistance, then no cognitive development will occur at all. So it's very necessary when someone is learning in their zone of proximal development that some development is taking place in that interaction. The next of the important concepts is scaffolding. And scaffolding describes simply the nature of assistance given by that more knowledgeable person. As a learner completes a task within the zone of proximal development, cognitive development is greatest if the level of assistance is large at first and then gradually reduced as the student is learning. And so we do that every single day of our lives as we teach. I teach economics at the International Baccalaureate level, and the subject matter is somewhat technical and the language is proprietary to this subject and technical. And I begin with some direct instruction most days and demonstrate, a problem on the board and work through it, everybody working through it together. Then I break them down into small groups and then ask them to demonstrate learning on their own as a form of assessment. And so I think that's a pretty good example of scaffolding. And then lastly, he introduces the concept of psychological tools. And psychological tools, I think the very simple illustration we have of what a psychological tool is would be, and one of the examples of psychological tools would be oral language among others, such as written language, symbols, maps, scientific method. But that term Iblik that we met in the textbook is a psychological tool. So a whole cultural concept is wrapped up in a word Iblik. It's a certain kind of snow that doesn't have any granular elements, and so there we have the Vygotsky and the three concepts that are important to his theory. I actually witnessed this week, and I thought I would just mention it very quickly, a story that I'm calling The Tale of the Covetous Chauffeur. And I live over here in a world where people are either very wealthy or very poor. There's not much of a middle class. And I witnessed a very wise and a wealthy entrepreneur sharing with his son the other night. My family was here from Canada, and we were invited to this mansion for an evening tea. And he began to teach us and his son through a story of the covetous chauffeur. And it goes something like this. His personal chauffeur was very downcast one day, and he asked him why, and the chauffeur said, "My wife is very upset and disappointed with me that I cannot provide us with a suitable apartment." And so the kind and wise entrepreneur said, that's no problem. We've been together a long time. I will take care of that for you. And secondly, a few weeks later, that same chauffeur, downcast again, And asked by the entrepreneur what the problem was, he said, "My wife is upset and very disappointed in me that I cannot provide her with our own personal family vehicle." And the entrepreneur once again said, "Not to worry, I can take care of that for you," which he does. And yet again, a third time, the chauffeur comes back downcast, and when asked by the entrepreneur what the problem was, said, "My wife is very disappointed and disappointed with me and upset that our children have less than a good education. And I really like it if my children could study at a better school than they're studying right now." So the wealthy entrepreneur in his kindness said, "Well, we will take care of that too. We'll arrange to have your children go to a good school." And so one more time that chauffeur comes back, and the entrepreneur looks at his face, knowing he's got something to say, and asks him, what's on your mind? The chauffeur answers, "I think it's about time we started to look for a new chauffeur." And so it was really an interesting example of how this tale or anecdote had taken into consideration all of the cultural things that these post-Soviet wealthy people are dealing with, and sort of lower income levels, coveting what they have and infiltrating into their life to get what they want. And so it was a living example of what I read about in the textbook with Limuk and his father and the seal hunting concept. Well, Vygotsky, having looked at his theory again and getting ready to look at a Glasser Mastery Learning classroom, but let's look again at what a Vygotsky classroom might look like based on what we already know. Well, cognitive development is fostered through social interaction. I think we're all clear about that and in agreement with that. I think we would probably all agree that other theorists, such as Piaget, had some strength to the way they looked at learning. But I don't know about everybody else out there. But in discussing it with my wife, who is a career teacher, we're very comfortable with what Vygotsky teaches us. His class would be an active classroom, would include extensive use of language in order to transmit that culture, reading, writing, and speaking, and resulting in a high instances of cooperative learning to facilitate learning objectives, getting people into situations where they would be in their zone of proximal development, where they would be with those others who are more knowledgeable. And I love this quote, which will end this portion of my presentation. And according to Vygotsky, "Through others, we become ourselves." So I'm going to invite you in a moment to log on to part 3, and we're going to look at the Mastery Learning classroom and find out if Glasser's application of his Mastery Learning can stand the Vygotsky test and being effective for aiding in the cognitive development of secondary students. So I hope you've enjoyed part 2, and we'll see you in part 3 in just a moment.